Can you see that?
Yes, we see stars, the space.
Yes. So I think this photograph is interesting. It was taken just recently by a very powerful space telescope that NASA sent out. And I understand that astronomers and planetary geologists and others have tried to number all the stars there are. And they literally suggest that from what they can estimate, and as far out as we've gone, there are more stars in the heavens than there are grains of sand on all the beaches on Earth combined. So it's a mind-boggling number. And yet I look at a photograph like this and I think it's hard to deny the existence of a supreme being or of a creator who believes in beauty as much as function. And I would like to begin with a scripture. God is speaking to Moses, and he says, came to pass, this is Moses 1:8, it came to pass that Moses looked and beheld the world upon which he was created, and Moses beheld the world and the ends thereof, and all the children of men which are and which were created of the same. He greatly marveled and wondered. And then if I skip ahead to verse 32, he talks about all of these things he's created. I'll start with 33. And worlds without number have I created. And also I created them for mine own purpose, and by the Son I created them, which is mine only begotten. And then skipping to 35, but only an account of this earth and the inhabitants thereof give I you. For behold, there are many worlds that have passed away by the word of my power. And there are many that now stand, and innumerable are they unto man. But all things are numbered unto me, for they are mine, and I know them. So it's kind of mind-boggling that Moses here is verifying what, or is discussing what science is now proving. In verse 32, the Lord says, by the word of my power have I created them, have I created all these worlds, which is mine only begotten Son, who is full of grace and truth. And I think describing the Son of God as the word of my power is an interesting phrase. I think our word is an expression of our thoughts, of where our heart is. And for God, his Son is an expression of his intentions. And by breathing out these words, he expressed his intention and his ability to create. And so we want to begin with that, with that idea. It's also important, well, in introducing our topic, which is living intentionally, to say that God is the master of intentionality.
Well, and we learn that all things are created first spiritually and then physically. So he literally set intentions. He had plans, and then that creation was possible.
Right. So as we decide to become creators in our own lives, that's, that's a model we can work from. We can understand that our Father in heaven has that he has our best interest at heart, and that he uses the power of intention as he has created everything that we now enjoy. Just to share the screen again for a moment. Part of creating our life is writing our own story. And because our emotions come really more from our thoughts than our circumstances. Our situations, of course, have an impact on us, but the way we interpret and understand them is even more powerful. And a way that I can describe this to many single adults that I think makes sense is many single adults that I have worked with have adopted in one form or another the story that it wasn't supposed to be this way. It wasn't supposed to turn out like this. The plan of God has not really worked out for me. The gospel has not really worked out for me. And when we tell ourselves that story, there's a great deal of pain and judgment that we're hanging on it, hanging on the facts of our life.
And sometimes we don't even know to question those thoughts. Sometimes we assume they are reality because they feel so real and so true. In fact, life keeps showing up with circumstances to prove that to us. And that's something we work on as coaches with our clients and also with ourselves, is we're committed to intentionally question the stories we tell about our own lives and about our own circumstances.
Right. And sometimes we can make a tremendous shift in the way we feel by shifting the way we understand something. In other words, could you say to yourself, maybe this was part of my path. Maybe every loss that I've experienced has made room or made space for something better.
And could that be just as true as the other stories?
Right.
And if so, which serves you better?
Right. And, we can apply this in all kinds of different areas. Like I have a son who I love very much, who is in his mid-20s, and he's not active in the church. Now, I think he still believes it based on things that he's said, but that's a belief I choose. And I also believe that ultimately he'll be back. And so I think it's I can choose to believe, yes, he'll eventually be back. How? I don't know. When? I don't know. What I know is that God knows how to do his own work. And so I trust in that. I think for any painful circumstance in our life, there's a story that we can adopt that is more supportive, more optimistic, and more powerful than the one that thinks something has gone terribly wrong.
Right. And that's usually what it helps to get, like some kind of coaching or therapy, or talking with a friend and having someone else maybe tell us what our alternatives are, because sometimes we can get really stuck.
Right.
We can get really stuck in our thinking, especially if we've been thinking it a long time.
Right. And I can tell you, I am speaking as a person who didn't understand the power of intentionality uh, for a lot of the time during and after the period when I was going through my divorce. I mean, I had 4 years where I literally woke up every day feeling like I'd been kicked in the stomach and carried that feeling around all day long and took it to bed every night. And it was relentless. Now, I think that feeling would have come to me when my marriage broke up. I think it's, I'm not trying to cure normal here. I think, in fact, it can cause us a lot of problems if we refuse to
Feel our feelings.
feel our feelings. But I also understand now that once we've had a chance to process them, I mean, we're going to pitch a tent in that place, as I recently heard another life coach talk about. We can pitch a tent in that space, but we don't want to build a home there. We don't want to stay there permanently. And part of moving beyond those painful emotions and traumas is accepting a new narrative, a new story that interprets the situation in a way that is more hopeful.
And we call it radical acceptance because whenever we fight against the reality, when we think it shouldn't be a certain way, that's when we cause ourselves a lot more pain than we otherwise would have to feel and go through. That's where we create more of the stress on our bodies.
Right. I mean, if I'm thinking it wasn't supposed to turn out this way, my life is broken, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. If I'm really unresolved in that space, I can't help but feel a little hopeless, feel like a victim. And yet, when I think about, I've told this before in other groups, but if I hadn't lost my corporate job in Houston, Texas back in 2015, got laid off, I wouldn't be now serving as a constitutional lawyer for the governor and the attorney general, which is a much better fit for me and something I'm much more passionate about.
And suited for.
Right. If I hadn't been divorced, I wouldn't have Cathy. I wouldn't have her two kids as my stepkids. So as I look back, I think those things that I ultimately learned to believe in, even before they happened, turned out to be true. And I think you can take comfort in the scripture in Romans 8 that all things work together for good to them that love God. And I think you can look at a situation and say, this may not be where I wanted to be, but God, use me here how you will.
Well, and my divorce was really painful too. And I definitely made a bit of a home in that space of I've lost everything. Life is over. It couldn't possibly be as good as it was, which is kind of crazy to think about now looking back, but that kept me stuck for a long time. And that's part of why we wrote Intentional Courtship, because we know that healing can be more intentional, that it can be quicker when we do so with a clear vision of, okay, this is painful. This is hard. I really lost a lot here, whether it be divorce or widowhood or really terrible breakup like that we didn't expect. We can end up healing a lot faster when we do even that with intention, with intentional effort.
Right. I want to read a short passage from our book, Intentional Courtship. I hope a lot of you have read this book, but this is in my portion, and I write, I suggest there is a simple harmony between the law of the harvest and the law of attraction. And unless you've been buried under a rock, you've at least heard of the law of attraction. But the basic idea is that I bring things into my life by focusing on them. And those things that I focus on, I get more of. I suggest there is a simple harmony between the law of the harvest and the law of attraction, because we sow thoughts and harvest outcomes. The law of attraction suggests that we get more of whatever we focus on, that our thoughts have a power of their own. If we sow bitter thoughts, we cannot reap sweet outcomes. If we sow elevating thoughts, we can achieve elevating outcomes. We form our characters and identities through our thoughts. As President Ezra Taft Benson taught, thoughts lead to acts, acts lead to habits, habits lead to character, and our character will determine our eternal destiny. So our thoughts determine what we will become.
It determines who we are and who we're being now as well.
Right. There's the proverb that says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Another way of saying what I just quoted President Benson saying.
You know, I'd like to point out something new I've been pondering lately, and that is that our human brains are designed to focus on fire or danger. And when we think something is dangerous, we can't help but zero in on it. And sometimes that might be an emotionally charged comment on Facebook or a rude text or something. And we might have had 20 people that day tell us how awesome we are, or how much they appreciate us, or that they love us. I mean, I'm just giving an example, but our minds naturally want to just go to that one negative thing and dwell on it. And if we're not careful, those can overpower all the good, and it's not balanced. So that's another thing with the law of attraction to keep in mind, is that our brains will want us to focus on what we don't want, and then we're going to start attracting more of it if we allow that.
Yeah, we're going to start seeing it everywhere. And I think it's really important to also point out, as we discuss this, that the covenant path is a path of intentionality. If you think about it, when we are baptized, we make a covenant with God that is punctuated by being buried in the water and raised up, symbolic of the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and symbolic of being cleansed, and symbolic of dying and being reborn. Very profound and beautiful symbol. And it is a way of evidencing the fact that we have made an inward commitment and set our intention to behave in a certain way going forward. Now, it used to be in medieval England, for example, there was a principle called season, which means you're possessed of a particular piece of land. And in those days, most people couldn't read or write, even the rich and powerful. And you couldn't literally pick up a piece of land and put it in your pocket or something like that. So often there was a ceremony where you would hand someone a stick from a piece of property indicating that you had just sold it, or pick up a clod of dirt and hand it to them. And you may do this in the presence of witnesses, because it signified, in a way that people at that time were culturally familiar with, that they were making a commitment. Okay, this land is no longer mine, it's yours. And many of our covenants can be thought of in a similar way. Our temple covenants, there are certain things that we do that indicate inward commitments to behave in a certain way going forward. And not only that, to adopt certain thoughts and attitudes going forward. you know, to be a consecrated person is a very deep concept. So anyway, making the point that the covenant path, which President Nelson is always reminding us of, is a path of intentionality. And by the way, this graphic, if you hadn't already figured it out, is of Lehi's dream, and talks about a path to get to the tree of life, which represents the love of God as manifest through his son.
Well, and I'd like to just share something I've committed to myself to do on a daily basis. I think my number one job every day is to be in a place of feeling good. And that might sound strange to some people, but for me, when I feel good, if I've been well fed, I've had enough sleep, I've done enough self-care to feel fueled, I show up better for everyone and everything. And so it's good for all the people I love. It's good for, of course, myself. And I think it's what God wants us to do as well, because when he asks us to love him with all our heart, might, mind, and strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves, sometimes we need to bring that as thyself after the comma forward a bit, depending on, where we're at in our level of being able to take care of ourselves enough to function as humans. I mean, I think that story of the manna in the scriptures is not just of our reliance on him, but our reliance on sustenance, our reliance on taking care of our physical bodies, and that we can't store it up. We can't exercise for a year in a week, or,
Right.
I mean, that would be silly. And we can't eat, all the nutrition we need and store it up for, an extended period of time. It has to be every day.
Right. So yeah, taking care of ourselves intentionally is really important. And I went to a therapist for a while because I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, and I remember talking to her about how physical exercise often, was the thing that was the fastest, easiest remedy for anxiety. And there were other things that helped too: meditation, prayer, I could go down a list, but physical exercise was the thing that would really punch it in the face the fastest. And I said, but I feel a lot of times like I'm under pressure. Of course, that's anxiety, and I don't have time to go out and go for a run or whatever. And the therapist said to me, you know what? Don't think about it, because if you think about it, you're going to talk yourself out of it. Just set the intention, and when the appointed time comes, don't think about it. Put on your shoes and go out and run.
Like, an intention is almost a covenant with yourself. It's more than a thing on your calendar. It's I really am committed to making this happen.
Right. I'd like to refer to a passage in our book. This one is from Cathy. She wrote, "I think it would surprise some mid-single acquaintances to learn how I emphasized all that was going right in my dating experience. Perhaps they would assume I was lucky and dismiss it, maybe even supposing they were not as lucky. Maybe there is some truth to that theory. I do believe that luck is a factor in dating and in marriages that make it. However, I also believe that because we get more of what we focus on, what we think and talk about, the law of attraction is always at work in our lives. As I chose to focus on what I wanted more of in dating, I got more of it. Because I experienced this, I wholeheartedly believe that intentional focus on what is wanted in your dating experience can bring more of what could be considered luck into your dating life." And I think that's really true. If you have the attitude that I hate dating, I want to be in a relationship, but I hate the things that I have to do to get in that situation and it never seems to go anywhere anyway. And what is it, if those are your thoughts and even your words, what are you going to see every time there's a setback, every time there's, an encounter that doesn't go exactly the way you want? It's going to reinforce all of those negative beliefs. Who is more likely to keep trying? The one who believes that that special person is out there for me, or the one who thinks it never works out?
Well, and I'll just give everyone a hopeful thought. If it's never worked out yet, and I'm going to add yet. Yet is a big, important word. It only has to work once.
Right. That's right. And hopefully it only does work once. So that's an extremely important thing to keep in mind. Living intentionally and directing the mind is a feature of being on the covenant path, and it's a feature of designing your life the way you want it to be. And if your feeling is, I'm not in a place where I want to be, what can I do to prepare for being in a place where I do want to be? And I love the story of Kurt Warner. It was made into a movie, American Underdog. If any of you are football or sports fans, Kurt Warner comes kind of out of nowhere to make his first NFL team when he's 28 years old and play in his first NFL game when he's that age, and then takes his team all the way to the Super Bowl and wins it. And over his career goes to 2 more Super Bowls. And I mean, he literally came out of the arena league, was playing in a rodeo arenas before this. Well, he talked about how at one point he was just sacking groceries and on food stamps trying to feed his family. And Kurt's, I've heard him interviewed on this, and he said, I just looked up and said to God, I'm in a place I don't want to be. Use me how you want. And please tell me, is there anything I can do in my current situation that will somehow prepare me if I do get another shot at professional football? And what ultimately came to him is at the end of every shift, he had to face the aisle, which meant to bring the cans out to the edge of the shelf and to turn them so the label faced the aisle. And he said, I'm going to make this the best faced aisle in the entire store. It's going to be perfect. And you think, what could that have to do with being a great quarterback in the NFL? And he said, he says, I don't know if anyone else noticed the extra effort that I put in, but I did. And it instilled in me the idea that whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to be great at it. And put in that extra time to get it as perfect as I can. And I think, we can take the same kind of approach. If we feel discouraged because, we're only seeing our kids on weekends, or we're having struggles with a former spouse that's, angry toward us, or, go down the list of things that mid-singles deal with, the heartache of losing a spouse either to divorce or death, or the mid-singles that have not yet ever been married and sometimes despair of ever finding that blessing because they feel they don't have any evidence that it's ever happened before, despite sometimes years of trying. What can we do? We can tell our Father in heaven, I'm not in a place that I want to be. Use me as you can. Direct me to the things that are going to prepare me for my future. And as Kurt Warner said, sometimes you have to do what you have to do while you're preparing to do what you were born to do.
Yeah, and he never stopped preparing. until the opportunity came, he never stopped preparing. And I believe on LilyPod, we have a podcast called Creating Luck. And we talk about this, that when it's preparation meets opportunity. Let's see, is that the saying?
It's a saying by Zig Ziglar, who was a big time motivational speaker in the 1970s. And he used to say success is where preparation meets opportunity.
That's right. So his preparation met opportunity and led to his great success in football.
Right. And you know, he never, although he was very discouraged at times, he never gave up on his dream.
Yeah, even though he was a late starter, and for a lot of us, we're late starters in our eternal marriage. Some of us are, I mean, you're probably still looking, but and then when we get there, we're older than most, just like he was older than most, but he still kept preparing in case, so that when that opportunity came, he could be successful.
I met Cathy and we got married when I met Cathy when I was 47 years old, and we got married when I was 50. And you know, but my wedding day with Cathy was no less joyful than my first wedding day. And in fact, probably more joyful, because I understood what it was like to have loved and lost, to have experienced the deep heartache of building a life with someone and having that person give up on it.
And we'd also done a lot of intentional personal work. So it felt like a big triumph, not to just be getting married, but to be getting married, having healed a lot and having grown a lot.
Right. I want to go back for just a second to the first slide that we presented. As we think about the blessings we care most about, and as you look, you know, into this amazing, seemingly infinite expanse portrayed in this photograph, and think about, you know, how many of those stars out there are suns, and how many of them have planets rotating around them, and how many of those planets have people on them. And it just blows your mind to think about the infinity of space. They can't be numbered unto us, because our brains don't have the capacity to understand anything that big, but they're numbered unto God, for they're his. But think about the promise that God made to Abraham. Abraham was a flawed individual, just like you and me. But he demonstrated his devotion to God and proved to God that there was nothing God could ask of him that he would not do. And what was the promise God gave to Abraham? He said, because thou hast done this thing and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son from me, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars in the heavens, or the sand which is upon the seashore. And I'm stating that from memory, but I know that was pretty close. I think it's important, as we think about the promises that God has made to us, he's promised to make us as he is. And I want to tell you, the fact that you may have gotten divorced, or may not yet have had the blessing of being married, and certainly not if your spouse has passed, those blessings have not been lost to you. Those promises have not been lost to you. And sometimes I mean, I know when I got divorced, I literally felt like I had lost my exaltation in a way, that my eternal family was, what's the point now? Of course, that's one of those thoughts that is not empowering, not supportive.
Well, and those kinds of losses can cause us a lot of fear. And I just heard in church on Sunday, and I wrote it down because it seemed so profound to me. We know who's in charge of fear. And it's
Right.
not God.
Right.
So that's another thing we can be intentional about, is to notice when we're feeling fearful and recognize where that's coming from and choose to breathe through it and to return to our faith.
Right. I love that scripture, and I quote it all the time. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. If you're in a moment when you're really triggered, where you're really upset with another person, you can know 100% of the time that that's not from God. Now, it may be warning you of a legitimate danger. You see a car coming around the corner fast when you're in the middle of the street, you may feel that fear, and that's what fear is for. It's to help you out of a situation like that. The problem is that our fear response is so overgeneralized that we're afraid of a lot of things that aren't really dangerous. And so anyway, yeah, the Lord has not given us the spirit of fear. That comes from elsewhere.
And we do have the power for all those things that aren't truly dangerous. We have the power to shift our mind to peace and to the sound mind. So really, whenever we're fearful, we can think, okay, what thoughts are causing this? And we can question them, because Satan's really good at lying to us through our minds.
Right. Satan can convince us that there is no point now because we've been through a divorce. And maybe that divorce was part of your path. What can we do if we're in a situation we don't want to be in beyond what we've talked about? I mean, we talked about looking for God's purposes and asking God, use me the way you want. We've talked about looking for ways, even though we're in a situation we may not want to be in, to make the most of that and prepare for the situation we do want to be in. Also,
we have this really cool opportunity to become the person we want to be with.
Right, without anybody else's permission.
And then no matter how long it takes, we enjoy our own company.
Right. We've also talked about the law of attraction. The Doctrine and Covenants talks about, how light cleaveth unto light, virtue loveth virtue, and so forth. Birds of a feather flock together. So if you become a person of light, you're going to attract people with that inner light as well. And so that's another important idea for when you're, in a place you don't want to be in circumstances that are hard. Maybe you've just been through a breakup. I mean, that can be very painful. What is our ultimate destiny? I like this graphic of a crown of glory resting on the Bible. Our ultimate destiny is a crown of glory in God's kingdom. And I want to read a quote, and this is from the dedicatory prayer of the Salt Lake Temple given by President Wilford Woodruff. And he said, really listen to this request. O thou great Father of the spirits of all flesh, graciously bless and fully qualify those upon whom thou hast placed a portion of thine authority, and who bears the responsibilities and powers of the priesthood, which is after the order of thy Son. Bless them all from first to last, from thy servant who represents thee in all the world, to the latest who has been ordained to the deacon's office. Upon each and all confer the spirit of their calling with a comprehension of its duties and a loving zeal to fulfill them. Endow them with faith, patience, and understanding. May their lives be strong in virtue and adorned with humility. May their ministrations be effectual, their prayers be availing, and their teachings the path of salvation. May they be united by the Spirit and power of God in all their labors and in every thought, word, and act. May they glorify thy name and vindicate the wisdom that has made them kings and priests unto thee. And as you know, we have all made priesthood covenants, male and female. We have been anointed to become kings and queens, priests and priestesses. And if you think about it, we wouldn't receive those promises in the house of God without some attending power that goes with those things.
It's true. You want to go to the next slide?
In a second, do you have more to say on this?
Well, just that something else we've noticed about royalty is that every temple sealing, every temple marriage is a royal wedding.
That's right. And if you really listen to the words, you'll see that. I want to read one more quote, and this comes out of Intentional Courtship, page 76. This is from President John Taylor, and he says, "Do you feel as though some dreadful calamity has happened to you?" Of course, many of us have felt that way, that some dreadful calamity has happened to us. And then he says, "Have you forgot who you are and what your object is? Have you forgot that you profess to be saints of the Most High God, clothed upon with the holy priesthood? Have you forgot that you are aiming to become kings and priests to the Lord and queens and priestesses to him?" So this suggestion is, if we're feeling weak, if we're feeling powerless, if we're feeling like life is doing things to us, or dare I say, feeling like we're being acted upon instead of acting, a core part of the answer has to be, remember who you are. Remember the power you have been endowed with. And that in and of itself is going to help a lot to shift our mindset.
Yeah, well, and if I don't know about you, but anytime that I feel acted upon is the time where I feel so motivated to get intentional.
Right.
Because I'm feeling powerless, and intention can give us a lot more power over what we're creating in our lives. And I want to say one more thing before we go to this slide, this next slide. And it's left me, dang it. Hang on, it'll come back. Oh, I know. We're big fans of personal growth and personal development. And I know a lot of you are because you're here, right? But I think that's one really important quality to look for in a partner, because God is so, I mean, we don't even comprehend him. We're so not in his realm yet. Then growth really is a pretty darn important factor, I think, in being with someone who wants to become a god/goddess with you.
Right. So Cathy, tell me about this.
I have no idea
graphic.
where you're going.
Well, this is about being intentional in relationships. Now, every mid-single I've ever known well has got some trauma. They've lived long enough and been through enough that they have felt that they have some trauma. And that is often triggered by things that are innocuous, that are not even really important or dangerous. So Cathy, tell them about emotional sunburns.
Okay, yes.
We borrow this from Dr. Greg Bear.
Yeah, so emotional sunburns are the hidden emotional triggers that we don't see in other people. So we may say something very neutral. We may even say something we believe to be complimentary or what we believe will be helpful. And we could get backlash. We could get someone responding with anger or hurt or sadness or depression or frustration. And we don't know why.
Right. Just like if that person may have, fallen asleep on the beach and their back got cooked for 3 hours while they slept there. The next day at church, they've got a shirt and tie on or whatever, and you slap them on the back and say, "Hey, brother, how are you?"
Just a gentle.
And they may immediately wince and feel this searing pain through their back. Is it because there was something wrong inherently with patting them on the back in that way? No, you just touched a sore spot. And so if we know this about ourselves, how many of you out there want to have an explosive relationship where you tell each other off, where you call each other names, or as in this picture, you can see both of these kids are yelling at each other. They both have their mouths open and they're making dramatic gestures. And
they're reacting, both of them.
How many of us want a drama-filled relationship? How many feel that's exciting? If you do, this presentation probably isn't for you. But I will tell you that Cathy and I have it in us to fight all night.
So maybe it is for you because you can get together and figure out how to be peaceful.
Right.
Even with opposing triggers, which we
if
have.
you want to be peaceful.
Right. Well, and that's where you want to make sure that both of you are on the same page with that.
Right. So there's a couple things I want to say here about this that I hope you'll write down and remember. Number one, you can govern your relationship with emotion or intention. If you govern it with emotion, that's going to be a hot mess. If you govern it with intention, intention overrides emotional chaos and turmoil. So you can say to yourself, I'm not going to talk to my spouse when I'm emotionally flooded.
Right. I'm going to choose to take a time out to self-soothe and come back when I'm feeling peaceful.
Right. And be intentional about coming back and resolving it later. So that is one example, but there are other examples. What boundaries are going to protect your relationship when you talk about, opposite sex friends and things like that? What are your agreements going to be so that you avoid pain and misunderstandings? And, there's always going to be some times when you hurt each other's feelings. You don't mean to, but because we all get triggered, we have it in us to do what the people in that slide were doing. And it doesn't have to be that way. John and Julie Gottman have said that if your heart rate reaches above 100 beats per minute, either person, there is a 0% chance, according to their research, that you're going to solve the problem in that condition. And so why sit there and make threats, one up each other?
You pretty much know everything coming out of your mouth is just going to be hurtful.
Just going to be damaging to the relationship. Yeah. So we have it in us to fight all night. We're both that stubborn, but we don't ever do that. Because if either one of us says time out, we both know it's time to go back to our corners, self-soothe, take care of ourselves until we're ready to come back together and have a more productive conversation. And you know what? We can solve stuff in like 5 minutes when we do it that way. Sometimes before we even get to the point of needing a timeout, if we realize we're starting to talk faster and talk over each other, either one of us can say, slow down. And what we're supposed to do then is take a deep breath and take turns talking. And sometimes that can help to calm things down before it reaches that threshold of intolerance.
Well, and I'd like to point out that we can take 100% responsibility for our own emotional well-being, and that we should in relationships. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be sensitive. I believe in being sensitive because it's loving. But if I expect Jeff to be a certain way with me, then I've got all sorts of premeditated resentments in me if he doesn't follow through on my own erroneous assumptions of what he should or shouldn't do for me. We can be responsible for our own triggers, and we can recognize that they're in us. That even if it might have been, you know, that pat on the back or that thing that was said that triggered us, we recognize it's not them, it's in us. And what's really cool is when we understand that an emotional trigger, as icky as it might feel, is actually an opportunity to heal what's coming up. Because if it's coming up, it's ready to heal. That's what I believe.
Yeah, for sure. I believe that too. And to just do a little thought experiment, if you have kids, if they're, I don't know, some of you may have kids that are teens or beyond. If they're offered drugs out behind the gym or wherever, at a party, what emotions might they be feeling in that moment? Well, peer pressure for sure. I've got to fit in, you know, the desire to be accepted is very strong, particularly in kids that age. So what do we always tell them? I mean, how well do you think when you're under that kind of pressure and anxiety? Not very well, right? We tell our kids to know the answer before the question is even asked, so that the response is automatic and you don't have to think about what to do in the heat of the moment when you don't think right.
Well, and that could be like the timeouts that we do, right?
Exactly. It's the same principle,
Yeah.
that we are being intentional about how we manage the dangerous things we all have inside us.
Right. Well, and the other thing I want to point out is we can also make agreements or set intentions and commitments with ourselves to assume good intent. It's the number one rule of perfect communication, according to one therapist I know, and it's always stuck with me, that giving the benefit of the doubt to people that we now, of course, at some points, you know, if there's any kind of emotional abuse going on, then some mistrust needs to be there, and boundaries need to be set, and potentially end the relationship. But in most cases, when we assume good intent, that everybody's doing the best they know how, and then we make decisions accordingly, we're going to be more often right than when we assume that someone's lying or assume that they are they have malice. I mean, yes, there's bad dudes out there, but for the most part, we're all doing the best we know how, even if our best isn't something you can live with, and then you can choose not to date that or marry that person, obviously. But I think just to hold space that we're all doing the best we can, and we all deserve to be treated with respect and to be given the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, what you just said reminds me of what John Gottman said. You're aware of this too. He has made an agreement with himself that when Julie, that's his wife, when Julie is in pain, the world stops and I listen. Now imagine if everybody could make that agreement with themselves and be able to carry that forward, you know, the vast majority of the time. It would be a different world that we lived in.
Definitely. Jeff, you're actually pretty good at that. And we try to be good at that with other people as often as we can. And we get busy and hurried and not always paying attention, but it would be a good world, I think, if we were to do that.
Right. One of the most important areas where we can be intentional is gratitude. Now you'll notice on this tree, the person has written that they're grateful for love, friends, family, home, faith, health. You could add any number of other things up there too. Each of your kids could be in one of those hearts. Grandchildren, if you have them. your spouse once you get married, your girlfriend or boyfriend if you're dating someone, your car. I mean, there could be any number of things. The point is, this isn't just good manners. It's the key to happiness. And why is it the key to happiness? Because we can only enjoy anything that we have to the extent that we appreciate it. When we appreciate it, because if you think about it, anything we want in life, new car, let's say, we want to have that because we want to feel certain things, right? We want to feel security, or we want to feel this car is fun to drive and it's exhilarating.
Or we want
whatever.
to feel that we can get to and from work.
Right.
And other things.
Right. And so, if you really appreciate it, those emotions are going to go along with it. If you don't, if you take it for granted, I mean, I think in my first marriage, I had this beautiful wife and these two beautiful kids and a beautiful home that overlooked Puget Sound. And, I think I just thought it was all just normal, that I was a guy in my 30s and I had achieved a few things that people thought of as success. And I just thought that was just normal. That's what people do, right? They go to college, they get degrees, they get married, they build careers, they build homes. Well, the problem with that thinking is, if it's just normal, it's not special. And you're not going to really appreciate it unless you think it is special. So it is not just good manners to be grateful. It's the key to happiness. We can only enjoy the things we have to the extent that we appreciate them. After I lost everything, and I finally got a good car that ran after 4 years of hobbling along in an old clunker, when I started to get back on my feet financially and I bought a good car, I couldn't get behind the wheel of that thing without feeling immensely grateful. And, there's other people with nicer cars. That wasn't really the point for me. The point was, I had a car that ran well and was fun to drive and I enjoyed, and I appreciated it. And you know what? Because I appreciated it, it added to my happiness in a way that no other car I ever had before did.
I felt the same way about my single mom income being enough to take care of my family and being able to balance my time the way I wanted to. I want to talk about gratitude for just a minute, even though we went off the screen.
Yeah.
So, how I mentioned near the beginning that my number one job every day is to be in a place of feeling good. And part of that is having a high vibrational energy. And for anybody who's ever studied, like, there's scales, and sometimes it's on a scale of like 1 to 100, and sometimes it's like 1 to 700 or whatever. And gratitude is one of the top. So of course, hating and jealousy and all of those are very, very low on the vibrational scale. And if you've ever walked into a room and you kind of know the general energy that's in the room or in the people that are in the room, and you all of a sudden you feel uncomfortable, or all of a sudden you feel excited, or any of the number of emotions, we walk around all day carrying these energies that we're then sharing with each other. And so when we're in a place of feeling good because we're feeling grateful, we know that that we have the ability to feel joy with the thoughts we choose, then that's the light we're bringing into that room. That's that feeling good. It's more than just like, an entertainment kind of feel good. It's an palpable, in fact, is even a spiritual lift too.
Right.
And, the word that kept coming to me when you were talking about gratitude is entitlement. What's the opposite of gratitude? When I think that something should be mine, that I should have this blessing. And of course, I think we all come to expect, daily food and all the things that having our needs met, right? But what about when our needs haven't been met? Or what about when we haven't had those things? And if we can really be grateful for what we have when we have it, I think we're less likely to feel gypped when we have a loss. Instead, we can think, man, I really loved that thing and I was so grateful. I hope I get it again.
Right.
So
I think one of the most important things we can be grateful for, and one of the most important things we can do intentionally, is divine love. And I think we want to conclude on this subject, but divine love is that love that our Father in heaven has for us that is universal. He loves all of us regardless of what we do. Doesn't mean he rewards us all the same, but it means that he loves each and every one of us, and that he's always there for us when we turn to him. And in like manner, Jesus said, as I have loved you, love one another. And if you think about it, I mean, Jesus died for all of us, from the most righteous people to the vilest of sinners. He paid for all of our sins. And is it possible for me to love Cathy without expecting anything in return, without putting conditions on it, without saying, in effect, you have to change who you are to be loved by me? And if you think about it, that is a cheap imitation for real love, for divine love. And we want to encourage you. I mean, can we behave this way? Well, God is love. He's the personification of it. God can do this every minute. We can try it for an hour or two. We can try it for a day. We can continue to work on it to see when we've been less than loving. By the way, I'll give you a little clue. If you're angry or disappointed, you're thinking about yourself and not the other person. So, can we maintain that kind of love all the time? No, but we're on this earth to learn. And as we try to create relationships in our mid-single years that are going to last eternally, I think we want to infuse them with as much of that kind of love as we can.
yes, and when it comes to divine love, I think one thing that helps, and this is kind of something I've been pondering a lot this weekend, the idea that I don't need you to do something in particular for me to love you. I might want something and I can even express those desires, but I'm not going to expect it in order for me to be happy.
Right.
I'm going to choose to be joyful. I'm going to choose to be happy and show up in that energy and give that energy to the situation, no matter what you choose. Now, of course, when other people make choices, then we have to make choices based on those choices. And ultimately that can lead to some really hard choices, like, what some of us have experienced with divorce. But ultimately, when we're responsible for our own emotional well-being, we don't put all that pressure on the relationship and the other person, and we can just show up and love them because we've first allowed ourselves to be filled by the love of God through our own self-care and our own connection with him.
Right. And being intentional about divine love must inevitably include the ability to self-confront. And we have to develop that. How do we do it? Intentionally.
Well, and part of that intention has to include compassion, because this is another thing that's been on my mind a lot lately, is that we cannot self-confront if we're in shame or blame. Both
Right.
of them are completely useless, but we tend to feel like we need to point a finger outward or inward. And when we can just stop the finger pointing entirely and self-confront with compassion, knowing that we're human and it's okay. It's totally okay. It's okay whatever we've created in our lives so far, it's okay. But what have I done to contribute to it? Can I see myself in that picture and be able to do something about it? Because that's where our power is.
Right. Dr. Greg Bear talks about, a little, at least when we interviewed him, he talked this little analogy, or not analogy, this little example. And he said that sometimes he might be walking through a room where his wife is, and she says something and he gets annoyed and sort of gives a snappy response. And he gets to the next room and he thinks, darn it, I did it again. So he turns around, walks into that room and says, I think I was less than completely loving just now. And he says, his wife will say, yeah, you were. He says, she never lets me off. Now, a lot of times we don't think about those little moments, those little things we might do that hurt our partners just a tiny little bit.
Or our
because
kids or our friends.
They're less than loving
Yeah.
moments. And we all have them. But what makes the difference between someone who is developing divine love and someone who isn't? Well, are you committed to it? Are you intentional about it? Do you focus on it? Is being genuinely loving important to you, as imperfect as your efforts are? Is it something you're focused on and trying to grow in? And I think if it is, life is going to be a lot better and sweeter. And Dr. Greg Bear says, by the way, it's fun. He says, fighting over
lack of love.
Yeah, fighting over imitation love is hard. It's taxing. Trying to exist in real love, where you just love and you don't expect something back, that's a lot more fun. It's a lot better way to live. It gives you that shalom in your heart.
Yeah. And we have an interview with him. He's the author of all the Real Love books, and it's Real Love with Dr. Greg Bear on LilyPod. It's a really good interview.
Yeah. I think we probably ought to get to something interactive if there are people who want to talk.
Do you want to?
I want to put up a slide and give you a minute to take a screenshot of it or whatever. This will show you all of our links to our various materials that we provide.
Yeah, so you can access LilyPod at Anchor or any of your main podcast apps, whatever your favorite is, whatever you like to use. Also, LilyTube, we bring out a new video every week and a new podcast every week on those two. And then our website, you can navigate around there and see what we have to offer there, including our coaching program, and Lily Instagram, our Facebook page, and our Facebook group. So we can connect with you all, like in lots of places. Oh, right. We're also on TikTok. If you are over there, if you happen to be over there, we do shorts.
I want to conclude the formal part of this presentation by bearing testimony that God is a God of order and intention. That, from the beginning, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. It was matter unorganized. It was chaos. And then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And that light came in and infused that unorganized matter with spirit, made it live. And if we learn to be intentional, we will remain on the covenant path with greater comfort. We will love more the way that God loves and see people more the way that he sees them. And we will create better, healthier, and happier relationships and happier lives. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.